All right. My name is Geraldine Barbie, and I'm the Assistant Director of the National Afro-American Museum and Cultural Center in Wilberforce. Thank you for joining us tonight for our kickoff of the 2024 Black History Month program. And here's a nice shot of our museum in the fall. So we're on the campus of Central State University, but we are affiliated with the Ohio History Connection, which is our statewide historic preservation, historic site system. We have about 59 museums in the system, and we're one of them. So a few little housekeeping things I want to start off with. Please use the chat to report any technical issues. I'm going to be upfront. I am kind of rusty on Zoom, so I would advise if you do have any technical issues, just to log out and then log back in, and hopefully that will solve your issues. We are recording this event, and the recording will be posted to our Facebook and other social media pages, as well as our YouTube channel. If you have a question, try to use the Q&A button, which is in the bottom half of your Zoom screen. You can't put questions in the chat, so I'll try to keep up and check both places. And so, I didn't mean to show you that, but since it's on here, here's our Black History Month calendar. I'll put it back up later on at the end of the presentation, but you see our current exhibits that are on display right now, and that link, and I will actually put it in the chat if you'd like to see the entire Black History Month calendar for not only the National Afro-American Museum and Cultural Center, but also the Ohio History Connection and several of our sister sites around the state. And I'm going to get rid of this. And I want to introduce you to our speaker tonight, Dr. Holly McGee, and she's a university professor at the University of Cincinnati in Africana Studies. Did I get that correct?
You did indeed.
And she's very engaging, and she also has a lot of information she'd like to share. I see somebody with their hand up.
Already, wow.
Let me see. Oh, somebody else has their hand up too. Okay. I'm not sure what to do. If you can put your question in the chat, that would be helpful. But we're going to get started and let Dr. McGee get started. She can give you a little more of a background, and she also wants to share the University of Cincinnati's Black History Month calendar with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Geraldine Barbie. Thank you so much to both to Geraldine and to the National Afro-American Museum and Cultural Center for inviting me for this kickoff event for February 1st. Happy Black History Month, or as we're calling it here at the University of Cincinnati, Black Future Month. Why? Because we are done with Black history. We are looking forward to Black futures. My name is Dr. Holly McGee. I am an associate professor of African American history, U.S. history, and South African history here at the University of Cincinnati. I'm in the Department of Africana Studies, and I'm incredibly excited to be here this evening to speak with you. If I can, I would love to spend the first 3 minutes of my time actually sharing with you a lot of the exciting programming that's happening here at the University of Cincinnati over the course of the next 29 days, because as you all well know, this is a leap year, which means that we have one full extra day to enjoy the goodness that is Black History Month. So if you will bear with me for just a moment, I would love to share an informational video with you that will tell you all about Black Future Month here at the University of Cincinnati. So give me just one moment and I will share my screen with you so I can share the goodness again that is Black Future Month. All right, you probably cannot hear what is happening on the screen, but you can certainly see what is happening on this screen. And so what you're looking at, what you should be seeing, is a QR code, and I'll share some of this with you afterwards. But this is a QR code that you can sign in, and so you'll be able to keep up with what's happening here on the University of Cincinnati's campus for the next 60 days. if indeed it is showing it to you. Let's see. Pardon me for just a second. It seems as if this is not showing. We spent so much time making sure that you could actually see this, and it seems as if it is not showing it to you. It's just a moment. Pardon me, give me just a moment. There we go. Let's see if it does that instead. And then let's see. Geraldine, could you let me know what screen you all can see?
We see you and I see your desktop.
Can
And
you
somebody did say they did see the QR code.
were you seeing the QR code a moment
Yep.
ago?
Mm-hmm.
You were okay, so it was showing correct screen.
Yeah.
Well then it messed itself up.
And
Pardon me for just
everybody,
there we go.
so
Let's see if it'll go back to that right screen. There. Can you see the proper screen now?
yep.
All right, then we are seeing the right screen. Okay, there we go. Let's try that again. All right. So then what you can see is this is the QR code. And I'll show this again at the end of our time together. This is just a quick QR code that is showing people who can sign in here at the University of Cincinnati. And everybody who signs in, they can see all of our various events. And you're welcome to sign in for all of these various events. It's just 60 seconds, quick QR code to sign in. And I'll show people this again at the end of the time that we have here. So if you have your smartphones with you, you'll see, so what do we mean when we say Black Future Month here at the University of Cincinnati? Well, why not just good old Black History Month? Well, what we mean when we say Black Future Month is that the old school narratives and programming tied to Black history that are filled with gloom and doom are all played out, quite frankly. So instead, for the 29 days of February, the Department of Africana Studies challenges you to join it and today's partners in celebrating Black Future Month by fearlessly leading 21st century conversations, interacting with our past and treasured in new ways, understanding the past is a platform for science, art, and technology-based Black futures, and centering Black identities, humanity, and outcomes in America and beyond. So what we would like for you to do is consider if you are actually ready for a February that is bigger, that is better, and thanks to the leap year, one that is whole day blacker. That's right. So what you can do at the end of this, if you have your smartphone, pull out your smartphone and you can scan this red QR code to download the full calendar of our events. Many of them are online. And if you're here in the Cincinnati area, you can join us for food, keynotes, fellowship, entertainment, and a lot of Bearcat-friendly fun. We've got Lift Every Voice and Sing Along, historical Black church visits, free Black food truck visits, and even field trips for our students. And you don't want to miss out on a lot of those. You can again pull out your cell phone and you can scan this QR code to sign up to be a friend of Africana Studies. And you can stay informed of all the programming that we do all year long. Special thanks to all of our partners, most especially the College of A&S, the Charles P. Taft Research Center, and the Office of Student Affairs here on UC's Central Campus. And if you are on campus for any of our in-person events, make sure that you pick up your free ticket for the free Black Food Truck Friday, which is next week Friday here on campus. All right, now that you know what's happening here on campus, let's get this party started, shall we? So that's what's happening here on UC's campus. And there are 29 full days of events. I know that a lot of time people say, well, what's going on with Black History Month? Black History Month is it's boring, it's played out. Again, it's Black Future Month for us here at UC, and we are incredibly excited about it. And so I'm excited about it, and I sincerely hope that you will be joining us for a lot of the things that we will be doing. So let's jump right into this talk today, because I know that we've only got an hour, and I'm excited about getting to the Q&A section of this particular conversation that we're going to be having today. So let's jump into it, shall we? And I will say that I recently had this conversation. I've just gotten back from a conversation when I was in Colorado giving this particular talk, and they had me in a chapel when I was giving this talk, so I had to be very careful about watching my mouth. And so I'm very excited about the fact that I'm in my office this evening, so I don't have to watch my mouth. But I think my mother might be on the call, so I may have to watch my mouth just a little bit this evening. But so I will be a semi-decent person this evening. I'll try to be. I'll try to be. All right. So let's get into it, shall we? There we go. Again, thank you so much for joining me this evening and deciding to spend your time with this very non-traditional Black History Month lecture. This is not going to be your traditional Black History lecture. First of all, you are online, joining me online, and we are not in a church. You are not listening to some pastor breathe deeply and rhythmically into the microphone. You are not going to be hearing about some long, long storied history from things long ago that may not have a connection to your present day life, but we will be touching on the ways in which that collective past touches on our everyday life, our collective present life. So let's jump into Not Your Grandmother's Black History Lecture Series. So I want to start this conversation that we're having today with a question. And it is a contemporary question that we run into every February. Every February. Who needs Black History Month? Who needs it anyway? It is the shortest month in the year, although every 4 years, like now, we get that extra day, right? It's that extra day. Oh, that extra day to be so, so Black, right? But who needs it anyway? It's the coldest month in the year. It is the shortest month in the year. And I tell you what, when I was coming up to campus today, as I was scooting up to campus because I'm on my personal scooter, I was shouting like a mad woman at students, Happy Black History Month, Happy Black History Month. And they all had these perplexed looks on their faces, like, what do you mean Black History Month? Well, it's Thursday, and I'm so excited that it's Black History Month. But none of the students seem to have any idea that it's Black History Month. They don't seem to have any idea the import of this day, of this month, of the meaning of this. And so it seems to be this national moment of reckoning that has completely lost its import and washed over the average citizen. So who needs it? Who needs Black History Month anyway? And that's a question that we're going to deal with, that I want us to really grapple with over the course of this next hour. And I think in order for us to really begin to grapple with this question, we need to first deal with some of the difficulties associated with African American history as a whole. What are some of the most difficult aspects of studying African American history? And then by extension, with recognizing Black History Month. And when we have these conversations about Black History Month and, by extension, African American History Month, it's very common. We know what the problems are, but we don't want to articulate them, or it's very difficult to articulate them. And I have these conversations with my students. I've been teaching here at the University of Cincinnati for over a decade now. I began my first 10, 11 years here at the university were in the Department of History, and now I'm in the Department of Africana Studies. And so I've seen, and I know from experience from working with college students, that some of the most difficult aspects of working with African American history is that, first and foremost, students just are not prepared. And these are college students. They're not prepared to deal with a lot of the emotions that are really wrapped up with studying African American history. The college, well, not the college, the public education system in the United States has done a very good job of normalizing United States history in our classrooms, from second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th. And if you went to a humanities-based college, probably from freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year, you probably had to take U.S. History 101, right? How many of us, raise your hand, even if you're at home, how many of us had to take a U.S. history class? How many of you took U.S. history class in junior high, in high school, over and over and over again? You were normalized with that narrative of the great myth of the great myth of the American of the American dream, right? And you become so normalized with that all other narratives fall to the wayside. Well, when a new narrative is introduced, it's challenging to what you think you know. And so those feelings of guilt, anger, depression, when they rise up inside of you, when they rise up inside of students, it can be very difficult when those feelings make you challenge internally those things which you thought you knew. So that's something that's very difficult for students to have to deal with. Pronouns. pronouns, when we normalize American history narratives as opposed to African American history narratives, that's incredibly difficult for students. I've spent a lot of time in the classroom dealing with predominantly white students. In my classroom spaces, I deal with predominantly white students. And in those classroom spaces, it's very difficult for students who have never had to think about how they communicate in a classroom, right? When you have to think about, well, we did this and we did that. And I have to stop my students and I say, I'm sorry, were you alive in the 19th century? Were you, were you a land owning, white yeoman farmer in the 18th century? Well, then you shouldn't be owning this. You should use proper language. You should use, 18th century slaves did this. 19th century yeoman farmers did that. Not we, not you, not our. And so, we need to teach students into these things, but we can't teach them into these things if we shy away from incorporating these narratives into our educational systems. Curriculum neglect, the fact that we center and prioritize repeatedly American history, US history, and we shy away from other narratives of American history. Because let me say this to you. African American history is American history, but American history is not necessarily always African American history. And that curriculum neglect normalizes one experience. It always normalizes one experience and sometimes shies away from other experiences. And what that does is it creates this historical reduction. It says that America is this, these are Americans, and everything else is something else. And we normalize that narrative for students, and we normalize people feeling as if they are not a part of America. And so what we create when we do these things, when we create this normative narrative of who Americans are, of what America is that we create with students a lack of dialogue. We either create a lack of dialogue or we create an ownership of dialogue that leaves people standing on the outside, creates people who are on the inside, and we create this contested terrain. And we're seeing this play out even today, right? With this battle of, the placement or the place of AP African American history in our high schools, right? We're seeing that right now. And what we see is, another one of these difficulties associated with studying African American history. And I see this in college, in colleges and universities, much less in high schools and middle schools, is that it's reduced to trivia. When I think about my experiences as a high school student in Arkansas, growing up in Arkansas in a public school, most students aren't introduced to African American history unless it's Black History Month. And even then, it's reduced to trivia. It's reduced to facts, figures, dates, once-offs, right? When was the Montgomery bus boycott? What date was Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated? And when you do that, when you reduce African American history to trivia, it becomes trivial. Let me say that one more time. When you reduce African American history to trivia, it then simply becomes trivial. So all you're doing is training young people, training students, training Americans to simply see the information as a once-off piece of something that you should just know because it fits in a box. It can get you a point at bar trivia, right? It can get you a point if you're playing a game with your students. It can get you a point if you're playing a game with friends, but it doesn't offer you any type of substantive information that can better your life or better society, or or propel or compel you to be a better person, right? And that's another one of those difficulties of studying African American history. Another difficulty is language. Right. So I've spent so much time using the phrasing, this politically correct phrasing of African American. African American, Black. Every now and again, you'll hear me in my classes use the word Negro. Uh-oh. She said a word. Oh, she said Negro. Oh. Yes, I did. Oh, there's so many other alternatives. I teach a class called African American History from, actually, the university has me teach a class. It's called African American History from what does the university have it called? The university says African American history from what did they say from something to 1861. I think they say from from slavery to 1861 is what they say. I refuse. I refuse to teach African American history as something that begins on the shores of British North colonial America. Absolutely refuse, because that's not where African American history starts. So I teach African American history as something that starts African American history from Africa, right? From Africa to George Floyd. That's what I teach, right? And so when I teach my students from Africa to George Floyd, then I'm able to teach them language, right? And I talk to them about the iteration of language. And I teach them racial slurs. I absolutely do. I teach them racial slurs. And the reason you teach students racial slurs is because they need to understand. They need to understand that racial slurs are outdated language from a racist past. And if you can teach them that this is outdated language from a racist past, well, then you can teach students out of that ignorance. And if you can teach them to associate that language with an ignorant, outdated racist past, they'll feel foolish using it in the present day. You need to normalize teaching that as an ignorant methodology, as an ignorant mindset. You need to normalize those things, normalize teaching that as ignorant, so then we can move forward as a society. And so another one of those difficulties of studying African American history, and by extension, Black History Month, is that there's such a narrow focus when it comes to African American history. And we'll talk about that narrow focus. And that narrow focus has to do with that long line of purposefully teaching passivity. And we're going to get to that. Let me say it again. That narrow focus has to do with teaching a long line of passivity. You don't know what I'm talking about yet, but you'll see it when I show you images, So what we want to do, what I want to do is I want to make sure before we get too deep into the woods here that we've got a Black History Month baseline, because we celebrate Black History Month or we talk about Black History Month, but I'm always very surprised to learn that there are so few people who really understand the who, what, when, where, and why. Why do we have Black History Month? Has it always been called Black History Month? Who came up with this thing? Was it a fever dream, right? Was it a fever dream? Was it just something that somebody came up with or some committee came up with so we could have a couple days off and we could talk about Blackness and celebrate certain things? Well, let's figure out the who, what, when, where, and why. When did this thing come about? Why is it so important? Why was it important then? Is it important now? Let's establish a baseline. Let's understand what Black History Month is all about. And then we can decide who needs Black History Month anyway, right? Well, let's go all the way back to the beginning and let's understand when Black History Month came about. And in order to do that, we've actually got to go digging back around in American history. And we've got to go back to the turn of the 20th century. So for any of the history buffs online, any of the history nerds online, any history nerds like me, I'm going to go all the way back to the end of the 19th century, just post-Reconstruction. Just post-Reconstruction, there are these two little time epochs, these historical epochs that traditional narratives of U.S. history will teach you about and will love to blow up in your minds. There are these two epochs of American history. There's one that's called the Gilded Age, right? And then there's the next one that's called the Progressive Era. So the Gilded Age, you probably haven't heard of the Gilded Age, but you'll know these names. So this is the age where like the rich get richer and the poor get ground into the dirt. This is the age of like the Carnegies, the Mellons. This is the age of the robber barons, right? This is the age when all of the like the trust building. This is the age of the big corporations coming about, right? This is the Gilded Age, right? This is the age of like all the corporations coming about. Well, immediately after the Gilded Age is this what you're seeing on your screen. It's the Progressive Era. Okay, so the Progressive Era, 1896 to 1916. So in the traditional narratives of U.S. history, the Progressive Era is the rise of the little man, okay? So the traditional narratives of U.S. history will tell you that this is when the little man starts to make a comeback. The little man, he wants to bust those corporations. He wants to bust those trusts. This is the era of tearing down corruption. This is the era of busting down tenement housing. This is the era of of immigrants coming to the United States. They've got dreams in their eyes, and all they need to do is work hard and pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and well, you can be a success in America. If anyone on the call has ever heard of or ever read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, then this is exactly this era, right? If you've never read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, you absolutely need to read it. Upton Sinclair writes this expose of the meatpacking industry in Chicago in the early 1900s, and it's all about this immigrant family that moves from Eastern Europe to the United States looking for a better life. And instead, this man, Jurgis Rutgers, he is this tall, strapping immigrant who is ground up, like, I mean, it's a perfect analogy, right? He's ground up in the meat packing industry, and he goes from being a tall, strapping man to being broken and used and ground into the dirt, right? And so this is this is the era of progressivism, right? But it is this is where the dream of America is born. This is where that era of that myth of the American dream comes about. But it's not necessarily progressive for everyone in the United States, because for Blacks in America, this is also known as the nadir. Now, traditional narratives of US history will say that this is the progressive era. But for Blacks, again, this is the nadir. And for anyone who's not familiar with this term, let me explain to you what the nadir is. The nadir is the low point. And this is indeed the low point. This is the low point in race relations in the United States. Let me give this to you again. The progressive era was from 1896 roughly until about 1916. And the reason I say this is the low point in race relations in the United States, you need to understand this is post-emancipation and post-Reconstruction in the United States. Post-emancipation, post-Reconstruction, and this is at the height of the Great Migration. The height of the Great Migration. And anyone who knows anything about the Great Migration, this is the lie that we tell students in middle school. The lie that we tell students in traditional narratives of US history is that those 4.4 million newly enslaved, recently freed Blacks from all those recently freed Blacks, they left the South. They left the South for better opportunities in the North and the West and the Midwest, and they wanted better opportunities and they left. But what US history doesn't tell you is that when they left, going to the West and the Midwest and the North and all those other places, none of those cities wanted to absorb those hundreds of thousands of Black bodies that were looking for jobs and places to live and wanting to finally be able to negotiate wages and speak up for themselves and buy land and buy property. No one wanted to open their doors. There were not white communities in the North and the Midwest saying, come, we can't wait to have you. Please stop. That is not what was happening. This is what was happening. Post-emancipation, post-Reconstruction, Black bodies lost value across the nation. Oh, I struck a chord there. Let me say that one more time. Post-emancipation, post-Reconstruction, Black bodies lost value. Enslaved Black bodies had value. There were laws across the nation that made it impossible for you to maim and murder an enslaved person without penalty. You had to reimburse a master for damage that you did to a Black body. But post-emancipation, post-Reconstruction, no such laws existed. And people were angry about that. Think about that. Think about that for a little bit. And so the truth of the matter was is that it was open season on Black bodies in the United States at the turn of the 20th century. And this meant racial chaos. I am a big fan, as a historian, I'm a big fan of turning to newspapers, Black newspapers, white newspapers. I'm a big fan of turning to newspapers to really find out about what happens in a society. You can look at a newspaper and you can see the hopes, the fears, the imaginative dreams, and even the the frightening realities of what's happening in a city, what's happening in a country. And when you look at newspapers in the United States at the turn of the 20th century, this is what you see. You see riots continue, riot at South Omaha. And you see this, and I've purposefully not just pulled newspapers from the South. I've pulled newspapers from Nebraska. I've pulled newspapers from Colorado. I've pulled newspapers from everywhere. But you want to keep in mind, when you see things that talk about race riots, when you see things at the turn of the 20th century that say 432 Negroes murdered, 2 whites shot, that's not a race riot. That's a massacre. When you see 232 Blacks murdered, 3 whites dead, that's not a race riot. That's a murder. And you see this happening at the turn of the 20th century across the United States, not just in the South. This is the low point of race relations because it is open season on Blacks, men, women, and children across the United States. In 1901, take a look at the top right-hand corner of your screen. In 1901, the most successful song in the United States was Coon, Coon, Coon. You cannot tell me that the United States is in a progressive era if the #1 song being sung everywhere is Coon, Coon, Coon. Now, you can even find this song. It's being played on YouTube. You can find it on YouTube. When we get off of this call, anyone who's interested, go to YouTube, type in 1901 most successful song. You can find Coon, Coon, Coon. At this turn, this is the low point of race relations. Black communities like Tulsa, Elaine. At the turn of the 20th century, Tulsa and Elaine are only 2 of the most well-known race riots, pardon me, Black communities that were being massacred. Tulsa, Elaine, Rosewood, these are 3 of the most well-known, but there were dozens of Black communities across the United States where they were simply bombed, beaten, raped, burned, shot out of existence simply because they were self-sufficient, they offered some type of economic competition, or they simply existed outside of the confines or outside of the authority of some local white town or some local white administrator. They simply existed. This is the low point of race relations in the United States. This is also the time post-emancipation, post-Reconstruction. This is also the time, this is the birth of the minstrel tradition. If you take a look, this is the time when white artists and entertainers, they are beginning to engage in blackface. This is the birth of blackface, where white entertainers will blacken their faces, wildly gesticulate around and wear tattered clothes, and they do something called jumping Jim Crow. So they jump around and I do say, they start speaking in vernacular. I do say, sir, and they start jumping around, and it's great entertainment for whites to mock Blacks, to mock former slaves. This is the birth of the minstrel tradition. There's nothing progressive about this. This is also the rise of sharecropping. If you're not familiar with sharecropping is simply, I mean, it was a genius way to tie Blacks, free Blacks, to tie Blacks to white lands and replace them under the heel of white authority. This is also the time of the rise of the KKK. For anyone on this call who has never seen or heard of D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, oh my goodness, you should absolutely, absolutely check this film out. Birth of a Nation, Birth of a Nation. Birth of a Nation, it premiered in 1915 as The Klansman, okay? It was used as a recruitment piece for the KKK. It was one of the most popular movies in the history of film. It was controversial, absolutely controversial, and the NAACP at the time vilified it, and it was called the meanest vilification of the Negro race. And it absolutely was. Race riots erupted in the wake of the film's release, and it was truly, truly the most popular movie of 1915. It was so popular that President Woodrow Wilson requested a private screening of it in the White House. Now, listen, this movie is about 3 hours long. I'm going to tell you right now, it's 3 hours long, but you can find it. You can find it on YouTube. And it is a silent moving, it's a silent picture film, but it's a silent moving film. But there are words in it that moves you around, but it's a delightfully disturbing film. Delightfully disturbing, moving epic, lots of white characters in blackface, disturbing. And because the film is incredibly disturbing, because the film explores these two great American issues. You know, D.W. Griffith envisions this movie. He creates this movie because he sees that post Civil War, he reimagines the South as this place that has been turned upside down, right? Freedom is the worst thing. Emancipation is the worst thing that could have ever happened to the South, because now that blacks are free, well, all they want is to take over, push the white man out of the way, and have sex with white women. Oh my goodness. And so this 3-hour film is all about these fears, these imaginative fears that white Southerners have, which is all about interracial sex and marriage and the empowerment of blacks. And so when President Woodrow Wilson requests a private screening in 1950 in the White House, what he says after seeing this movie is, it's like history. It's like writing history with lightning. And my only regret is that it is all so terribly true. It's like an official endorsement. The President of the United States has looked at this racist man's fever dream come to life on the big screen and has basically said, yep, it's true. That's what free Black people want, to push the white man out of the way and just have sex with white women. He said that in 1915, and you can only imagine. It's already open season on Black bodies. The Klan membership spikes across the United States. This is the number one. This film becomes the number one recruiting tool, and it is open season again on Black bodies across the United States. And so what was needed in all of this, it's not the progressive era, it's the low point in race relations. And because of this, society needed a psychological corrective. Enter Carter G. Woodson. Enter Carter G. Woodson. So Black History Month, as we know it today, it was originally conceived as Negro History Week in February of 1926. And so Carter G. Woodson originally intended this as an educational medium. This first week, he wanted it to be an educational medium because what he wanted to do, he wanted to provide an opportunity for multiple aspects of Black history and the Black experience in America to reach wide audiences. Listen, what he wanted to do was to disseminate positive information and positive images about Blacks to society at large. If you think about it, he wanted to do the same thing that W.E.B. Du Bois wanted to do when he encouraged Blacks to fight in World War I. He thought, W.B. Du Bois and Woodson, Carter G. Woodson believed, if we can humanize ourselves in the eyes of America and in the eyes of whites, they won't treat us like dogs. They won't kill us like dogs in the streets. Because the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment weren't really doing anything. I think today we have a saying about baseball, right? We have a saying about the sport of baseball, that baseball is America's first great pastime. That simply is not the case. We say that, and we do, we say that the baseball is America's first great pastime. That's not the case. America's first great pastime was lynching. At the turn of the 20th century, America's first great pastime was lynching. Nothing brought ethnic whites together. At the turn of the 20th century, nothing brought ethnic whites together better than lynching. If you wanted to get, Germans and Irishmen and Hungarians to forget their class differences and their ethnic differences, if you wanted them to forget all those things, all you needed to do was run an ad in the newspaper and say, hey, we're going to be stringing up some Negroes this weekend. And if you think that didn't happen in the United States, you are sadly mistaken. And so what Carter G. Woodson wanted to do was to disseminate positive images, positive information. He wanted to change that psychology. He wanted to change that negative constellation of ideas that had been existing in the United States for hundreds of years that allowed for Blacks to be treated with impunity. He wanted to change that. Man, you can legislate the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. That's great, but you can't legislate the hearts and minds. And this is what Negro History Week was this is what Negro History Week was intended to address. And so generations later, the recognition of that week grew to encompass a month. And this February marks the 98th anniversary of Black History Month in the United States. And so from the late 19th century well into the 1960s, Jim Crow was the system of laws and customs that enforced racial segregation and discrimination throughout the United States, but most especially in the South. Let me say this. I say this to my students all the time, so I want to make sure that I don't miss the opportunity to say this on this call, which is one of my pet peeves, one of my teaching pet peeves, is that it drives me bonkers when people say, well, racism existed. No, racism did not exist in the past. Racism still exists today. And then my second pet peeve is when people say, well, racism existed in the South. Don't you dare tell me that. Don't you dare tell me that racism existed in the South. Racism exists. Racism existed in the South. It's easy to demonize the South simply because that's where the vast majority of Black bodies were prior to the Civil War. But racism and discrimination exists across the United States, throughout the United States, right? Despite measures like the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, legal and extra legal measures engineered to return Blacks to white authority. Again, sharecropping tied hundreds of thousands of Blacks to agricultural work on farms owned by whites. If you do not know how insidious the system of sharecropping is, the idea of having to go into debt to borrow tools from the landowner the landowner whose land you're leasing to borrow tools, to go into debt borrowing tools to borrow to lease the house, the land, the seeds that you would have to plant, to go into debt year after year after year. You would never get off that land. And this was insidious. But this is how, if you have no job skills, if you have no ability to negotiate a contract, this is how hundreds of thousands of Black families were tied to Southern lands without the ability of participating in the Great Migration, without being able to leave, right? The constant and unpredictable threat of lynching became an effective means of maintaining the status quo of white superiority. And so the uncomfortable reality that existed in the 1920s was that America needed Negro History Week to combat Jim Crow, which was, again, that system of laws and customs that enforced racial segregation and discrimination, again, throughout the United States, but most especially in the South. And so my question that I'll ask today is, who needs Black History Month 98 years later? Because if this is what they were dealing with back at the turn of the 20th century, well, I mean, yeah, it was bad. They were dealing with, lynchings and Jim Crow, and it was blatant racism back then. Oh, people are being lynched by the thousands. And if you want to know how many people are being lynched, just turn to Tuskegee. The Tuskegee Institute began keeping those lynching numbers, and they are in the thousands, well into the 60s. Well into the 60s, there are numbers well into the 60s. But the question is, who needs Black History Month 98 years later? Well, the uncomfortable truth is that maybe we still do now, because the truth of the matter is, Americans, we're socialized to know polite Black history. I would venture to say that many of you on the call, most of you on this call, most of you only know polite Black history. And I'm going to guess that you know polite Black history because you know most of these faces. You might not know all of these names, but you know all of these faces. This is the approved Black history, right? I'm going to say this is the approved U.S. public history, U.S. public school history list of, I call these are the polite Negroes that you get to learn about, right? Yeah, that's right. I own language. I own language in my classroom. I do, right? So students will know that there's Harriet and there's Sojourner, but they might not know who is who, but they know that there are two Black women, right? And they'll know that that's Rosa, but only if she's sitting on that bus. Right? You don't let Rosa be standing up next to somebody else. They won't know who that is. They only know Frederick if he's sitting with his beard on and his hair like that. They do not know who Booker T. Washington is. They have no clue. Nobody knows that's Mary McLeod Bethune. They do not know who she is. Most students from Florida don't even know that's who she is, despite the fact that she's always pictured holding that cane, right? Everybody knows who Martin Luther King Jr. is. Half the people only half the people know who W.B. Du Bois is. And if Barack Obama was not pictured in color, I'm serious, if Barack Obama was not pictured in color, most people would think that he maybe just worked for the State Department because that flag was sitting behind him. But this is an endless parade of passivity. Because when students in middle schools and high schools and college are taught this in their U.S. history class, the narrative that emerges from being taught this during Black History Month is it's a narrative of docility, right? These are good Black people who were patient and kind and polite, and they worked alongside their white allies, And they said, wait, be kind, be patient. That's right. That they worked within the confines of the system, and they prayed. They prayed to a Christian God. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, I'm gonna pray for a better day. They waited for their rewards in heaven, didn't they? They were willing to extend their hands to their white neighbors and just wait. Oh, and because they were willing to extend their hands to their white neighbors and wait, well, we are comfortable with selling Black History Month, right? Because if you're comfortable with that, well, now because we're comfortable with selling Black History Month and this narrative of passivity, well, then we can sell our history. We can trivialize the selling of our history, right? And that's why during February, we can go into Target now. And there's a cute little section as soon as you walk into Target, and you can buy your shirt that says Ida and Sojourner. And yeah, right. And you can go into Etsy and you can get some little white woman to sell you a brown doll and any kind of cloth on it. It's kente cloth now. And if you're lucky, you might be able to even go into Kroger and you can sell. I did not make this picture up. Take a look on the right. You can buy yourself some great Kool-Aid for Black History Month special. Yes, you can. You might even be able to score you some Nikes. Ooh, right? Some Nikes, some special edition Nikes. Yes, that is right. We can trivialize Black History Month. We can trivialize Black History Month and we can sell Black History Month. Africa ornament, because that's what Black History Month is about. Because we've made it, we've normalized this passive narrative. Think about what Black history would look like if we broadened those historical narratives. Think about what it would look like if we taught students about Denmark Vesey, about David Walker, about Henry Highland Garnett, about Ida B. Wells, about Marcus Garvey, about, Nat Turner's Revolution. Think about what it would look like if we taught the Haitian Revolution. What would it look like to students? All students, not just Black students, if we taught a narrative of revolution. What would it look like if we taught students, let your motto be resistance? What would it look like if we taught students that the Black Panther Party was not a party that was a terrorist organization? They were a social uplift organization that fed the hungry when the federal government would not. What would it look like if we taught students that Harriet Tubman, I mean, listen, let's be real. Harriet Tubman didn't lead 13 successful missions and lead almost 70 people to freedom because she was just smart, right? Just because she was smart and, she was this woman was ruthless. She was ruthless, right? Think about that. Think about that. What kind of perseverance does that take? What does that change when we teach that type of narrative to students? How do we teach that to students? Well, we can. We can. And to say that, oh, it's that history is too tough, that history is too ugly, that history is too hard. Middle schools and high schools teach the Holocaust every day of the academic year. There's nothing too hard that we can't teach students. Of course, we can teach these things. Absolutely, we can teach these things. There is an ongoing racial divide in the United States. According to Unlocking America, if African Americans and Hispanics were incarcerated at the same rate of whites, today's prison and jail populations would decline by approximately 50%. Think about this. Wow. Widening the economic gap. The poverty rate in the United States for whites is 9.7%, as opposed to Blacks, 27.2%. These are the narratives that we need to be talking about. These are the narratives that are important when we incorporate African American history, when we talk about Black History Month. These are the types of narratives that we need to be bringing in, incorporating, not that tired old history. We need to be incorporating these narratives, right? So what we need to be doing when we talk about Black History Month, we need to be talking about contextualizing freedom in new ways. We need to be talking about citizenship in new ways. We need to be talking about what is progress. And so when we're asking ourselves about Black History Month, we need to be asking ourselves, where do people like Trayvon Martin fit in to Black History Month? What about Tamir Rice? What about Eric Garner? What about Michael Brown, right? Black Lives Matter absolutely factors in to this conversation about Black History Month. And so what I tell my students is the same thing I'm going to tell everybody on this call. You may not disengage. for the next 29 months, for the next 29 days, pardon me. You may not disengage. And the way that you don't disengage, and this is for everyone, students ask me sometimes, well, Dr. McGee, I thought Black History Month was just for Black people. No. Black History Month is for all Americans. It's for all Americans. And the way that you engage is that we talk to one another, we dialogue, and don't be afraid to dialogue. So ask each other. Don't be afraid to ask each other. What have your previous experiences been? It can be this simple. It really can. Open dialogue is key. What have your previous experiences been with Black History Month? You know, how did you learn about it in school? Well, I didn't learn about it in school. How did you learn about it in school? Ask people. Ask your kids. Ask your friends. At what age do K through 12 students, at what age do you think you should be introduced to more comprehensive narratives of American history? What would you like to learn about it? How can I help you learn about it? Ask people, do you think Black History Month faces national cancellation in light of local and national efforts to ban so-called divisive curriculum in schools? Ask people, sure. And ask people, well, if you can teach the Holocaust in schools, can we teach African American history in schools? There's nothing controversial about that. There's nothing wrong with critical thinking. There's nothing wrong with independent thought. Ask people. If you can't ask that for the next 29 days, what can you ask, right? And so what I'm going to say before we launch into asking questions, I want to challenge everyone on this call, use your privilege, use your knowledge, and use your positionality, whatever it is, wherever you are, to engage in Black History Month for the next 29 days, for the next 28 days, now for the next 28 days, for the consistent 29 days for February of 2024. And so when you ask yourself, and when I ask you, who needs Black History Month anyway? Every single last one of us. If you are a human being who cares about justice, who cares about equality, who cares about truth, you need Black History Month, period. And so what I will say is thank you so much for your time and your attention. And what I would love to do is open myself up for questions, and I will turn this over to Geraldine. Thank y'all so much. Let's get at it. Oh, I'm seeing hearts. Thank you. Thank you. I'm ready for those questions. Throw them at me. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, I guess what I will do, if everyone can hear me, is I will scroll to the top and let's see. If anyone would like to drop a question in the chat, I'm happy to entertain questions. I see a question about disparity in the workplace. Could I get a little bit more context on that? I'm not sure what types of disparity. Oh, absolutely. Banned books. Do you think, okay, I see a question in the chat. Do I think that banned books include a lot of books on good Black history? Absolutely. I actually recently did a talk, and I'll come back for another lecture series if they'll have me back here. But I recently did a talk on critical race theory and the banning of books in the public school system. And you'd be amazed at how many books can simply be banned because they have the word Black in the title, or the author's name is Black, or the word Black pops up in it, pops up in the book like a word search, a keyword search too much. And so absolutely, there's just a wealth of information that is lost simply because of a completely narrow focus of someone who is reading the book or reviewing the book or simply afraid of the information in the book. As a matter of fact, if you'll hold on just 2 seconds, I'm going to grab a book off of my shelf that I would love to share with you that has been banned, that was banned in Alabama for the most ridiculous reason. Give me just 2 seconds. I'll be right back. I'd love to show this to you all. So back in 1947, this book, if I can show it to you. Oh, I don't think you can see it. This book, The Rabbit's Wedding, this book was banned in Alabama in 1947 because there's a black bunny and a white bunny. They liked each other. This black bunny and this white bunny, they liked each other and they wanted to get married, and they liked playing with each other. And so they wanted to get married. And so the state of Alabama banned the book simply because it was a black bunny and a white bunny. And it's that type of ignorance that we're still seeing today in 2024. When it comes to the banning of books, you'd be amazed at some of the books that have been banned simply because of those types of foolish things. Do I scare my white students? As a matter of fact, some I do. Some I do, but I can't do anything about that. I'm not responsible for how people receive the information. I scare students sometimes, and I do anger students. But I have had students come to me and explain that their anger is not at me. Their anger is based around the fact that they have made it to the age of 19, 20, 21, thinking that they know what American history is because they have been exposed to it since the second grade. And then when they sit in on one of my classes, they learn something anew, right? They learn the progressive era anew. They learn the Gilded Age anew. They learn the Great Migration anew. They learn lynching for the first time. They hear who, Emmett Till is for the first time, and they're angry that they've never heard this, right? They know Black people in America are mad, but they don't know why. Well, they take my class and they figure it out. And they feel like this information has been kept from them. And so they're angry. They're angry at the educational system. They're angry with what they didn't know. And so that fear that they had of me, or that anger that they had towards me, changes into, well, why hasn't this been told to me? Well, now I understand. Now I'm better equipped. Do I scare my fellow teachers? Stop it. Of course not. Of course not. ah. Let's see. I disapprove of using the word minority because it's another verbal race limitation. People of color are the majority. Oh, well, certainly in the global context, we 3/4 of the world population looks more like me than it does for most of my colleagues here on campus. So I would absolutely say that we are absolutely in the majority. Any other questions? Let me see if I've missed anything. How do Native Americans and other minorities fit into the ongoing narrative? You know what? I actually have a former colleague from the history department who is brand new. Well, she's relatively new over in the department, and she is a specialist in Native American history. And I will say, as much as I feel African American history is lagging in its attention in the academy, Native American history or American Indian studies, it's even further behind. Unfortunately, it's even further behind. And I think that there's so much more work that needs to be done, so much more focus that needs to be done on American Indian studies. Let's see, I see 3 more messages. I am sure that Dr. Barbie will make this presentation available.
Yes, I was
Yes,
about to
I
type
am
it
a
in
published
the
author. I am an author of 2 books so far, and I'm working on my last 2. So my first book is entitled One Day We Are Going Home, The Long Exile of Elizabeth Mafeking. And I can absolutely make sure that Geraldine has a link to that you're welcome to purchase. It is the first biographical oral history of Elizabeth Mafeking. She was the first South African woman to be banned by the apartheid government back in 1959. And rather than be banned by the apartheid government, she spent 32 years in self-imposed exile in Lesotho. And so my first manuscript is about her. And then I recently just published my first children's book, and you'll see that on the shelf behind me. My first children's book, it's entitled It's Just Skin Silly. And so it is a co-authored book with anthropologist Nina Jablonski. And so we've written a children's book that's aimed towards 4th and 5th graders to talk to them about the evolution of skin color on a global context. And so that's available on Catalyst Press, and you can find both of those online. Please comment on the allegation that Black Lives Matter is a Marxist back movement. I will not. It's ridiculous, but I will do this. I will do this. I'm not going to give that any credence. But what I will do is I will speak to this narrative of Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. I keep hearing people say when I hear people say Black Lives Matter, every time I hear someone say Black Lives Matter and I hear someone say All Lives Matter, I always have to shut that down. And so for anyone on this call who has ever dealt with someone who they hear say all lives matter after they say Black Lives Matter, and you don't know what to say to that, I would like to equip you with what you can say, with the narrative to say, if you've ever struggled with, what do I say when somebody says all lives matter, right? And so if you've ever dealt with that, so I would like to give you something. So when someone says all lives matter, okay, when someone says all lives matter, this is the best analogy that I can come up with. And this is not my analogy. This is something that I've heard and dealt with and spoken with other people, and this is the best one that I've heard. When imagine that every and we know that race is a social that race is a social construct, but then I want us to, because we're, genetically speaking, we're all 99% the same, and it's just that last 1% that is basically like our phenotype, right? Because there's only one race, the human race. I get that, but I want you to imagine that all of these fictitious races that we think we are, so like Asian or black, white, whatever our races are, right? But I want you to imagine that we all live on a street. We all live on a cul-de-sac. We all live in a little cul-de-sac, and our houses are very close to one another. Well, I want you to imagine that my house is the black house, right? I'm the black house, and you're the white house, and you're the Asian house, and you're the. Well, my house is on fire. My house is on fire, and the flames are burning high. My house is on fire. The flames are burning high, and I run into the street, and I beg you, my neighbors who are standing on the street watching my house burn down. I beg you, you're standing there with your buckets of water, and I beg you, help me put my house out. Help me, my flames are burning. My house is burning. The flames are burning high. Help me, help me, help me, help me put my house out. And instead of you being good neighbors and helping me put the flames out, what you want to do is stand around and intellectualize about the fire. You want to tell me, I don't know, we're going to hold off for just a second because those flames might spread to my house. And what I'm telling you is, if you help me put the fire out now, those flames definitely won't spread to your house. But if you wait, it will. And so when I say Black Lives Matter, what I'm saying is my house is on fire and you have the means to help me put it out. Don't stand around and intellectualize about the flames. Help me put the fire out. So, question, what is my opinion on reparations? Well, I think one of the first things that we need to do is for communities out there that are struggling with thinking about reparations as a way of restoring to Black communities what has historically been defrauded from Black communities, stop struggling with that. If the word reparations is something that you're struggling with, perhaps think of it as restitution. If you imagine that from 1619 to 1877, successive generations of Black families were not allowed to learn how to read, to write, to own property, to marry, to move at will, to have a job, to negotiate contracts. If you can imagine that hundreds of years of that type of defrauding, and then after that 1877, and then for another 100 years, those same, the descendants of those individuals were then defrauded from the right to vote, to own property, and when they did, they were burned, raped, robbed, pushed out of that. So if you can imagine that hundreds of years of that type of cheating and defrauding, if you can imagine maybe that that there might have been some legacy or some impact of that, right? Maybe. If you can imagine that there might have been some impact of that, then maybe, just maybe, some restitution needs to be made to those families, to those descendants. And so it shouldn't be looked at as reparations, right? So it's not that something will be taken from one community and given to another. It's simply that restitution will be made. When we think about the federal government, it bails out multi-billion-dollar corporations on a regular basis. Why not restore to communities that which has been defrauded from it? I think about my own student loan debt. Back in November of 2023, I have finally been forgiven of my student loans. I had $149,000 worth of student loans that has been forgiven because I enrolled in the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. I teach at a public institution, and I had $149,000 worth of student loans that were forgiven. If the federal government could see fit to forgive $149,000 worth of my student loans, certainly it could subsidize $149,000 worth of student loans for 2, 3, 5 young Black students who can't afford to go to college, right? So restore that which has been defrauded from individuals. So there are all sorts of ways that the federal government, that states can restore things that have been defrauded. And it doesn't have to be a check. We can think very creatively. Tax abatements, right? People who haven't been allowed to, like people who have been cheated, defrauded with redlining, things of that nature. There are all sorts of ways. And so I do think that restitution needs to be made. And there are a lot of creative ways that restitution could be made, and a lot of responsible ways that restitution could and should be made. And when you think about things that are happening on a global scale, in the wake of the Holocaust, reparations have been made and to the tune of billions of dollars to the descendants of Holocaust victims, to the tune of billions, and continue to be made. And if you think about reparations, how many people on this call know that that the descendants, that in the wake of the Haitian Revolution, that the French government forced Haiti to pay reparations to the French government to the tune of 150 million francs. 150 million francs, which is like somewhere in the billions of dollars today. And both the US government and the British government backed France in forcing Haiti to pay them reparations. And so if broke Black Haiti can pay reparations to France for their freedom, right? For their freedom, don't tell me that restitution cannot be made to Black Americans, to the legacy, to the descendants of those who have been defrauded for hundreds of years in the United States. I'm just saying. That's just me, my tiny opinion. Any other questions? I told y'all this was not going to be your grandmama's Black History lecture. I'm so sorry.
It was not.
Take no lecture.
It
I'm so
was
sorry.
not. I'm gonna confess
I'm
that
so sorry, Geraldine.
no, you're fine. I'm gonna confess that my internet like crashed, but I'm glad the Zoom kept it going because I was freaking out, running around the house. Like, what's wrong? Turn on restarting the modem and the router. But I'm glad everyone joined us tonight. And as I typed in real quick that I will email you this presentation. We'll also post it on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. I don't want to cut off this. Anybody have any other questions? I think someone asked in the actual question and answer, where can we start as parents to reintroduce our kids to the real truth? I didn't know. Did you answer that? Because I'm sorry, I was in the house. I'm trying to figure out why the internet was off.
Where can we start as parents? That
Yeah.
is a wonderful question. Okay, where can you start as parents? This is what I'm going to say. Where can you start as parents? Oh, I know my mom's on this call, and I can't believe I'm about to say, Mama, do not call me after this. Please don't call me after. I'm about to have to admit that my mother was right about something. So please don't call me after this, Mama. But what I will say is where you can start as parents. Parents, y'all need to start making your kids read. You really do. You need to start making your kids read. Stop letting them learn history through television and entertainment. Stop doing that. I had a woman at a talk the other day ask me, she said, well, I watched Roots and I learned a lot about history through Roots. So what are some other movies that I can watch, have my kid watch, the blah, 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 blah. And I wanted to say to her, you know, if I was a scholar of disability studies, would you tell me, well, I watched My Left Foot and that taught me a lot, right? Would you have done that to me, right? I wanted to ask her that, but I didn't do that because I was trying to be polite. But stop letting Hollywood teach your students history. And so pick up a book and make your child read a book from like like vetted academic sources. One of my favorite sources, and this is your child's gonna be real mad at me. I'm gonna show you my favorite source, and this is like the go-to, the everything. When I was young in my household, we had a study, and if you got in trouble in my house, Mama would send you straight to the study. Mama would send you to the study, and she'd be like, "You go get a book." And you better read that whole book. And she'd have to look at the book and like pick the book. And you better read this whole book today. And you better be able to tell me about it by dinner time. And she flipped through the book. And I was so young and stupid, I didn't realize that Mama wasn't speed reading. I thought Mama had read the book. And so I'm killing myself all throughout the day trying to read the book because I know she's going to ask me about it at dinner time, right? I'm trying to get the book read. And so, but get a book for your child. And so we had an encyclopedia set at my house growing up. And Mama would make you go read something out of the beat. Tell me everything about an aardvark. You ought to be able to tell me everything about an aardvark, right? You'll pick anything out of the book. So one of the things that I would say, if you want your child to learn about African American history, this is amazing. This is new. If you do not have the Africana on your shelf, I call this the Big Black Book of Knowledge. It is the encyclopedia of the African and African American experience. It's pricey. I'm telling you, it's pricey. It's maybe like $175, maybe $200, but check this out. This has everything in it. You can learn everything from like Caribbean religious experiences to there's an entry on every country in Africa. There are entries on everybody from Marcus Garvey to Malcolm X to shoot to the Negro Leagues to I mean random things. But you get this, you can just send your baby to this book and say, hey, baby, you go read that. Tell me about this person. Tell me about Ida B. Wells. Tell me about this thing. Tell me about that thing. Your baby will never be the same again. Everything. This is a great starting point. Great starting point. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Deidre.
Yeah, and thank you so much. And I'm gonna put one more picture in for all the Black museums across the country. I know we have people from everywhere. We have an association of African American museums. Visit these, even when it's a little mom and pop museum, but take your kids to museums.
Yes.
I mean, even if they don't like to read, at Black bookstores, I mean, so the key is that you take control, as Dr. Holly's talking about, you take control of your child's education, because they're not going to learn this stuff in school. And I learn something every day, and I'm 66 years old, and I work at our museum. I've been there 8 years, and I've learned so much, not just about Ohio Black history, but Black history in general. And I thought I knew a lot, and I don't. So it's a lifelong process of learning as much as you can, because you're going to learn something every day about somebody who did something fabulous, that's just a local person you never heard of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I want to thank everybody. If you have any other questions, I think I saw somebody said that they want you to come to do a conference or workshop in Pittsburgh. So
I dare you to invite me.
so if you, I mean, just you can find Dr. Holly's info on University of Cincinnati's website. Just probably
I'll even drop my
Google,
email down into the chat
and
for you.
she's gonna drop her email into the chat. And yeah, I'm gonna tell you, I had her do this last year, and I was so impressed, and people were so excited. I had to have her come back, and this might be my annual thing, because she's kicking the knowledge real hard. For all of us who are think we know everything, thank you for the shout out for the DUSAB in Chicago. There's so many great Black museums around the country that need your support, and seek them out. Some may be good, some may be fabulous, some may be okay, but the point is we need your support to
Mhm.
keep telling these stories, and also encourage your children's teachers to take them to Black museums as a field trip, not just in February, because I am like so over everybody wanting to come in the next 4 weeks. We've got more phone calls than last week. It's been super crazy. But as we say, Black History is 365, baby. So thank you again. I'll send you the presentation by tomorrow. I'll try to get it done by Monday, but definitely by Monday. So I thank Dr. Holly again. That's my new ride or die in Black history, and I appreciate you. And thank you so much for joining us tonight, and have a
Thanks,
good
everybody.
evening.